Every great empire whispers the same sweet lie, that its money is invincible and its promises are eternal. And every single time, without fail, history arrives to prove them spectacularly wrong. From the marble halls of Rome to the revolutionary streets of France, from the battlefields of the Confederacy to the shuttered banks of modern Lebanon, countless generations have woken up to a horrifying new reality. The savings they spent a lifetime accumulating were now worthless. Their paychecks were meaningless paper, and the future they had meticulously planned was stolen by a system they were told was infallible. Collapse, you see, is not some rare black swan event. Collapse is the default setting. The real question is not whether the financial house of cards will tumble, but how you ensure you are not crushed when it does. The illusion of permanence is perhaps the most seductive and dangerous trap in all of finance. We glance at our digital bank balances and our crisp national currencies, and we instinctively assume they are as solid as bedrock. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Money is not a physical law. It is a social agreement, an exercise in collective trust, and that trust can evaporate in the blink of an eye. This is precisely why studying history is so brutally honest and so incredibly useful. Every economic implosion leaves behind a breadcrumb trail of clues, patterns, and warnings. It shows us what truly endures and what is destined to become worthless dust. And if you look closely, you will find that the survivors of these cataclysms were never the ones who trusted the system the most. They were the ones who had the foresight to doubt it first. Let us journey to the Byzantine Empire, the eastern remnant of Rome that clung to life for 1,000 years after its western counterpart fell. The beating heart of its economy was the gold solidus, a coin so legendarily pure that merchants from Europe to Asia accepted it without a second thought. For centuries, it was the medieval world's answer to the US dollar. But here is where the story gets a bit ironic for our longtime viewers. You would think the Byzantines would have learned from Rome's catastrophic mistake with the silver denarius, where emperors kept watering it down until it was basically a tin disc with a silver-colored spray tan. We have covered that disaster before. But no, centuries later, the Byzantines walked right into the same trap, this time with gold. They began chipping away at its purity, mixing in cheaper metals and hoping no one would notice. At first the scheme worked, but trust once cracked shatters completely. The coin that had once anchored the entire Mediterranean trade network became just another piece of political fiction. Its debasement destroyed its credibility, and the Byzantine economy lost the bedrock stability it had relied upon. So what survived this slow-motion train wreck? It certainly was not paper promises or imperial decrees. The real winners were the savvy merchants who had quietly diversified into tangible assets, like pure, unadulterated gold or land, far beyond the emperor's immediate grasp. They preserved their wealth while everyone else watched their money dissolve. This reveals our first timeless lesson. Governments can never resist the siren song of diluting their currency, and when they inevitably do, real value always flees to assets they cannot so easily counterfeit. But not every collapse is a deliberate act of government malpractice. Sometimes the system is shattered by a shock that arrives from completely out of the blue. In the mid-14th century, Europe was blindsided by the single most devastating pandemic in recorded history, the Black Death. Between 1347 and 1351, it is estimated that up to half of the entire European population perished. Cities became ghost towns, villages were wiped off the map, and vital trade routes ground to a halt. And yet, the economic fallout was far more complex than simple catastrophe. Think about it. When half of your workforce suddenly disappears, the survivors become incredibly valuable. For the first time, laborers could demand higher wages and better conditions. Land and food, once scarce, were now abundant in comparison to the number of people left. Anyone with a bit of liquidity, whether it was silver, goods, or just the ability to work, found themselves with leverage they could have only dreamed of before. If that scenario sounds uncomfortably familiar, it absolutely should. During the recent global pandemic, we witnessed a modern, high-speed version of the same phenomenon. Supply chains fractured. Governments fired up the printing presses to the tune of trillions to keep the economic engine from seizing, and a massive wave of inequality followed. Those with cash on hand bought up assets, while those living paycheck to paycheck fell further and further behind. In the United States, housing prices skyrocketed and stock markets rebounded with astonishing speed, while millions of regular people struggled to make rent. The historical parallel is crystal clear. Pandemics are powerful agents of wealth redistribution. They always have been. The survivors of the Black Death used the new scarcity of labor to climb the social ladder. The survivors of the recent pandemic with access to capital scooped up property, stocks, and businesses that others were forced to sell. The lesson is not a happy one, but it is true. Crises reward those with reserves and brutally punish those without them. While pandemics reveal how external shocks can upend an economy, the collapse of banking in Renaissance Florence teaches us something equally vital. Institutions that appear too big to fail can, in fact, fall like a row of dominoes. In the 1340s, Florence was the undisputed financial capital of Europe, home to banking dynasties like the Bardi and Peruzzi families. These financial houses had lent enormous sums to monarchs across the continent, most disastrously to King Edward III of England, who conveniently defaulted on his massive loans during his wars with France. When the king stopped paying his bills, the banks imploded. Depositors were wiped out. Commerce froze. Florence, the jewel of Europe, was plunged into chaos. The ordinary citizen who had placed their faith in the city's mighty banks learned a painful lesson. Size is not a guarantee of safety, and a sterling reputation is no protection from ruin. The lesson from Florence, that the phrase too big to fail is a lie as old as finance itself. Institutions are designed to generate profits, not to ensure your personal survival. When the reckoning comes, they will drag your savings down with them without a second thought. This exact pattern has repeated itself in every century since, from the Florentine crash to Lehman Brothers in 2008, all the way to the banks in Lebanon locking their doors in 2019. Survival, then and now, belongs to those who understand that an institution's promises are only valid until the day they suddenly are not. The American Civil War is primarily remembered for its great battles and its profound political consequences. But lurking behind the smoke and speeches was a brutal financial war that most people today completely overlook. Both the Union and the Confederacy quickly discovered that a war of that magnitude required funding that went far beyond taxes. The solution: just print more money. In the North, the government issued greenbacks, a new paper currency backed not by gold, but by the full faith and credit of the United States. In the South, the Confederacy, starved for resources, printed its own graybacks with reckless abandon. By the end of the war, Confederate inflation had reached almost comical levels, with prices soaring by thousands of %. A soldier's paycheck was worthless before he could even get it home. Families hauled around wheelbarrows full of cash that could barely buy a single loaf of bread. By 1865, the Confederate currency was not just weak, it was a ghost. In that chaotic collapse, what held its value was not the paper promises issued by a failing government, but tangible, hard assets. Land, food, tools, and gold became the only reliable stores of value, while official money became a cruel joke. For the average Southerner, this was an absolute catastrophe, as their life savings evaporated into thin air. Yet for opportunists who held tangible goods, the war presented a golden opportunity to acquire property and wealth at rock-bottom prices. It is a chapter of history that is rarely taught, but one we should never forget. America has already experienced a full-blown currency collapse. And when it happened, financial salvation came not from trusting the paper in your wallet, but from holding real value that the system could not simply print into oblivion. Revolutionary France provides another harrowing case study in how quickly political upheaval can decimate a currency. In the 1790s, as the revolution overthrew the monarchy, the new government issued a paper currency called the assignat. In theory, these notes were backed by the value of land seized from the church. In practice, the government printed them with the enthusiasm of a teenager with a new credit card. Each new wave of printing diluted the value of the last. Prices spiraled out of control, wages became meaningless, and soon the assignat was worth less than the paper it was printed on. Farmers began refusing to sell their crops for worthless paper, demanding payment in silver or goods. The bread riots returned to Paris, and the revolution, in its desperation, began to consume itself. Let us fast forward 2 centuries, where the same lesson re-emerged with a vengeance in Asia. In 1997, what started as a speculative attack on the Thai baht quickly spiraled into a full-blown regional crisis. Thailand, confident in its currency's stability, had borrowed heavily in U.S. dollars. When its currency peg broke, those foreign debts became instantly unpayable. Panic set in and investors fled, causing a chain reaction that toppled currencies across Southeast Asia. Economies contracted, unemployment soared, and governments were forced to go begging to the International Monetary Fund for a bailout. The people who suffered most were not the global financiers who started the fire. It was the ordinary citizens whose savings were gutted, whose mortgages doubled overnight, and whose jobs simply vanished. But is there a single thread that connects all these disparate events? Absolutely. The pattern is painfully familiar. Those who held assets in stable foreign currencies, like the dollar, weathered the storm far better than those who put their faith in their local currency. This crisis was, in reality, a massive global transfer of wealth. The lesson echoes from Byzantium to Buenos Aires. Holding significant debt denominated in someone else's money is a recipe for disaster. When the tidal wave comes, it is never the creditor who drowns. It is always the debtor. The most chilling realization is that financial collapse is not some dusty relic of the past. It is happening right now, in our lifetimes. Between 2019 and 2021 in Lebanon, the banking system did something that most people in the developed world consider impossible. They simply locked the doors. Citizens woke up one morning to discover their bank deposits were frozen. Their withdrawals were capped at laughably small amounts, and their currency was in freefall. The Lebanese pound lost over 90% of its value. An entire lifetime of hard work and savings was reduced to pocket change. People queued up for blocks, begging and pleading for access to their own money, only to be turned away. And this was not just a crisis for the poor. It wiped out the middle class, retirees, doctors, and engineers. Anyone and everyone who trusted the system was ruined. The lesson from Lebanon was as brutal as it was simple. The money in your bank account is not stored in a personal treasure chest. It is an unsecured loan you have made to a financial institution, which can decide, during a crisis, to simply not pay you back. The people who navigated this collapse most effectively were those who had already diversified their assets abroad, held physical gold or property, or had the foresight to keep a significant amount of cash outside the formal banking system. Everyone else was completely and utterly trapped. So, how can you possibly protect yourself when the pillars of the financial world begin to shake? History offers no single magic bullet, but it does reveal a consistent set of principles. In Byzantium, it was holding pure gold. After the Black Death, it was having the liquidity to buy abandoned land. In Florence, it was distrusting the bankers who seemed too powerful to fail. In the Confederacy, it was holding hard goods. In France, it was owning property and food. In Asia, it was avoiding debt in foreign currencies. In Lebanon, it was getting your money out of the banks before they slammed the doors shut. The details change, but the core theme is unwavering. Survival comes not from blind faith in paper promises, but from a clear-eyed understanding of what holds real, tangible value when all illusions shatter. And here we arrive at the central paradox that should keep you up at night. Every collapse is both a tragedy and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. For the unprepared majority, it is utter ruin. But for the resilient few with liquidity and assets that cannot be printed out of existence, it is the moment when wealth can be acquired for a fraction of its previous cost. After the Black Death, peasants became landowners. After the 2008 financial crisis, those with cash bought up entire neighborhoods while millions faced foreclosure. History demonstrates that protection is not merely a defensive strategy. It is about positioning yourself to seize the assets that others, under immense pressure, are forced to relinquish. But true wealth is not just about what you own. It is also about what you can do. The ultimate survivors throughout history were not just the people with gold bars buried in their backyard. They were the ones who could create value when the world around them was falling apart. The baker who could still make bread, the craftsman who could repair essential tools, the farmer who could feed a community, the merchant who could navigate broken supply chains. These were the people who did not just survive collapses. They thrived in them. In every crisis, the meaning of money becomes flimsy, but the value of production never does. People will always need to eat, to build, to trade, and to live. Those who can meet those fundamental needs are never poor for long. That is the deepest form of protection. It is not about blind faith in institutions or hoping the government will ride to your rescue. It is a powerful combination of real assets, real skills, and the sober awareness that all systems built on illusion are destined to collapse. Every crisis is a transfer. It is a transfer of wealth from the many who trusted to the few who prepared, from those holding paper promises to those holding tangible value, from the passive savers to the active builders. History has carved this pattern into stone again and again. The only question left is, when the music stops, will you be one of the many left holding worthless paper, or one of the few holding something real? If this gave you a new perspective, hit that subscribe button. History has all the answers, and we will show you exactly where to look.